there's a guy mentioned here in this list of names, and his name is Jabez, and he was the guy that asked you to enlarge his territory. And Father, I pray that through the study of your word and through the revelation of who you are, that you would enlarge our territory this morning and give us a nice wide open place to walk with you in, and help us to be the kind of people, Lord, that you want us to be. In Jesus' name, amen. Back to the history book, First Chronicles. Boy, I racked my brain trying to figure out how to attack these 9 chapters. And you know, if it was a football game, I'm going to do a fake in sweep and throw a Hail Mary, and or something like that. I don't know, but here again, let's remember where we're at. We've had this 70 years of captivity that Jesus prophesied through Isaiah and Jeremiah for Judah, and Isaiah also prophesied that Israel, remember we talked about the divided kingdoms, Israel, the northern kingdom, Judah, the southern kingdom, and that period of 300 years or so, and each kingdom had about 20 kings, and Israel they didn't have any good kings, and Judah had a few, very few. And after the captivity in Babylon, which Nebuchadnezzar Babylon spearheaded by the providential call of God, by the way. Also, the Assyrians, 130 years before, who had taken the northern kingdom, Israel, they were called by God to come and flatten Samaria. And the thing that happened in 722, and at that time, Assyria, after they ravaged the northern kingdom, they were standing outside the wall of Jerusalem, ready to take Jerusalem and Judah, and God called the king back, or the king got a message that there was trouble back home in Nineveh, the capital of Assyria, and he took all the troops and went home. And got murdered by his sons, by the way. So Judah went on for another 120, 130 years with the prophets telling them, you better stop this pagan idol worship that you have put in a blender with the law of Moses and come up with something that God hates worse than if you were just flat out just said, we don't want any of it. So the time came when the 70-year judgment started, and there were 3 deportations of Jews from Judah, one in 605, one in 597, and then the last one in 586 was when Nebuchadnezzar destroyed the wall of Jerusalem and the temple, and a time went on until the mighty world empire of Babylon was defeated by Persia. And so in 538, the Persian kings told the Jews that were in Babylon, you can go home, guys, go home and rebuild. Go back there and rebuild. So the first group of former exiles went home to Jerusalem to erect. It was the same way. It was just like Nebuchadnezzar left it 70 years ago. And they did under Zerubbabel, and Zerubbabel is important because he is a son of David. He is in the direct line of the kings of David, but he's not allowed to be king because this is Persia. This is not Israel or Persia. But he was an important guy, and he's mentioned in a couple of other prophets. But he started the foundation of the temple. That was the first priority, was the temple. But then they were discouraged by enemies and just by the whole situation, and they gave up for 18 years. And during that 18 years, a couple of prophets named Haggai and Zechariah either showed up or were already there. I don't know, but they were the ones that said, you need to get the lead out and get this temple built. And so it took 20 years to get the temple built, but it's built. So after that, 60 years after the temple was built, a guy named Ezra shows up. And he finds, well, the temple's built, and there are priests attending the temple, but what a mess. These priests are married to Canaanite girls, and being a priest and a scribe himself, it's his priority to get the law and the priesthood back in order. And then 14 years after Ezra shows up in 444, a guy named Nehemiah comes all the way from Persia, the king of Persia's right-hand man. And he has to get special permission. The king of Persia doesn't want him to go anywhere. And but he finally lets him go for a time. And Nehemiah comes back, and he is there to rebuild the wall. So that's what you've got. After the 70-year captivity, you've got rebuilding. The rebuilding of the temple, the rebuilding of the priesthood, the rebuilding of the law of Moses, the rebuilding of the wall of Jerusalem. That's what we've got up to this point, where Ezra, if Ezra is the author here, sometime 430, 440, that's when Ezra, Nehemiah, and Chronicles, that's when they think they were written. That's when he wrote this. And he wrote it, again, to give these people are still not on board yet. So we've got these 9 chapters of name after name after name after name. Why? It's to it's to reinvigorate the people themselves. Now, we talked about the temple was rebuilt, the priesthood was rebuilt, kind of, and the city and the wall are rebuilt, but the people are not rebuilt spiritually. So the first thing Ezra writes is 9th chapter of Names that says, this is your history, this is your identity, this is your hope after Babylon, this is your hope. I want you to know that Yahweh is still in charge, or you wouldn't be here again. So, in chapter 1 of First Chronicles, Ezra his history goes back as far as you can go back. Adam, there's the first name, and then to his son Seth, and then to his grandson Enosh. So for a while there, you get names in order: a father, a son, and a grandson, and you'll get that throughout these genealogies. But there's huge gaps after maybe 3 or 4 names, father, son, son, son. You might have a 100-year gap. You might have a 200-year gap. That's the way genealogies go. You hit the high points, because you can imagine, let's see, we're going to go from Adam to basically who we're headed for is Judah. David is who we're heading for. That's the point. So you've got, let's see, from creation to the flood, they say it was 1,650 years. After the flood, it was 300 years until Abraham, about 2100 BC. And then you've got the story of Abraham and his son Isaac, Isaac and his son Jacob. Jacob has 12 sons, and they spent 400 years in Egypt before God says, it's time for you to go on a walk. Walk with me. Well, that was the Exodus, and they walked with him for a while until they got tired and thirsty, and then they stopped walking and started complaining, and God says, all right, you want to complain? Now you can walk for 40 years until all the complainers die off, and we'll have a whole new generation. They're the ones that are going to enter the promised land. So you might look at God and say, well, you know, is God some kind of a dreamer? Is he an idealist that he thinks people are going to do what he says? Look, God is omniscient. He knows everything all the time. Anything that can be known, he knows. He knows what's going to happen. Why all the trouble? Why all the trouble? Well, you go to Matthew chapter 1. That's why all the trouble. And a baby is born in Bethlehem. That's why all the trouble. The trouble wasn't caused by God. The trouble is caused by people. And that's one of the things we're going to look at. In fact, you don't get past the first name in the genealogy before you see trouble. That's your history, guys. Your history is trouble. So, the verses, I'll just read verses 1 through 4 and just make a couple of comments of Chronicles, 1 Chronicles 1. Adam, Seth, Enosh, Kenan, Mahalalel, Jared, Enoch. That's the guy who walked with God and wasn't. Methuselah, this is the grandfather of Noah. Lamech, the father of Noah. Noah, and then Noah's 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. So now, after this introduction of your history, your hope, your history with God, and your hope with God, I should put it that way. that's how this. That's how Ezra begins this this genealogy. He goes all the way back, and where's he going? Well, he's going up to the flood, because those three sons of Shem and Noah himself are the only ones with their wives who made it through the flood. They're the only ones. And then we're going to start in on the history after the flood with each son. So I didn't get any maps again to show how this was dispersed, but Shem in verse 4, after the flood, and after, by the way, the Tower of Babel under Nimrod, who gets some time here. The man who would be the God King of planet Earth, and God, the way he does things. Everybody was speaking one language after the flood, and they were all following this guy Nimrod. And Nimrod built this big temple, and some say he built it to some pagan gods. He didn't. He built it to himself. He was the pagan god, and so God's not up in heaven rubbing his hands together and weeping crocodile tears over the way man acts. He knows the way man acts, and man acts the same way after the flood as they did before the flood. So, boy, how can I fix this? How can I break this party up down there? And he just gives certain peoples different languages. And, people start talking to each other and saying, "What'd you say? What'd you say?" And, "Oh, yeah, well, I'm leaving." Oh boy, and so that's when people started saying, "I can't even talk to those guys anymore. Let's take off." Shem stays where he is. They're in Mesopotamia, Babylon, Iraq today, but he spreads out. But the other brothers, let's see, Japheth, he kind of heads north into Turkey, and you'll see somewhere in that list the name Tarshish. That's in Spain. And so after the flood, at least Southern Europe and Eastern Europe is part of this mass migration that came from 8 people. I read an article. I probably mentioned this several times about a guy who did a very fair and balanced report, an article about what the population of planet Earth could have been between Adam and the flood in those 1,650 years. You're starting with 2 people, Adam and Eve, 1,650 years. And as I read through it, I was waiting. I was just wait. But he gave this. Okay, let's consider age. Okay, if you take the Bible for what it says, people are living 900 years. You know how many babies you can have in 900 years? But and he comes up with the population of the world in the multi millions before the flood. 1,650 years. Now, so after the flood, Noah lives 350 years. He was 600 years old at the flood. After the flood, he lives 350 years. That's into the life of Abraham, far into the life of Abraham. his son Shem lives 500 years after the flood. Man, that's into the 12 sons of Jacob. Where do you think all these stories are coming from? But I'm not saying that's the norm. 500 years after the flood, although Abraham does live to be 175, but I think he was even a special. Well, maybe or maybe not. Maybe people are still. That's kind of 150 years, something like that. Maybe that's how long they live. But things, the more sin pollutes the earth and the human race, the shorter people live. People have a fit about saying, what do you mean? Noah lived 900. Adam lived 900 years old. Methuselah lived 980 something years old, or something like that. What do you take me for? Well, see, that's not the problem, is that they lived to be just under 1,000 years old. The problem is that they're not living forever. That was the plan, to live forever. 900 years is not forever. But there again, it's that pollution of sin, and it causes all kinds of things. People start dying of diseases now, and as you go on, and all kinds of things. Getting back to Ezra here, and his history of that mentions the three sons. Okay, we mentioned Japheth. He goes north up into Turkey, northern Syria, Eastern Europe, places like that. And there is in verse 7, there's Tarshish. That's southern Spain. And you have another place called Kittim, Kittim. I don't know exactly which verse that may be in. That is in verse 7. That's a guy, but that's the island of Cyprus out in the Mediterranean Sea between Turkey and Greece. And then Rodanim, that's Rhodes, also an island out in the Mediterranean. So what are we seeing here? We're seeing the repopulation of the earth and the spreading out of humanity over the earth. Ham, the other son, in verse 4, the middle son there, he goes south. He becomes his people. Esau becomes the Edomites. He comes from Ham. Northern Africa, and then even further down into northern Africa, Ethiopia, places like that. And even up the coast, some of the Canaanites, and I think the Philistines are descendants of Ham. Shem, of course, is where the word Semite comes from. He is the father of the Jewish race and the Arab race. So there's your history, guys. Remember the covenant to Abraham that said God was that all people, all nations would be blessed, not just one nation. Genesis 12, verse 3, all nations will be blessed. He's going to raise up a unique nation, that's you Jewish people, but in him, in Abraham's seed, it comes from the seed of the woman, back in Genesis 3:15, he's going to come uh, eventually the Messiah comes through Abraham, who is a Shemite or a Semite, because he comes from which is down by the Persian Gulf in Iraq, and so there we go. So we've got pre-flood, we've got post-flood in the three sons of Noah. And then in verse 29, we have the descendants of Abraham. In verse 34, verses 29 through 33. Now, here's the thing about these names, and here's why I don't go through each one, because it would take 10 years to go through this list and explain these names, and 90% of them nobody knows anything about. Ezra knew about them. The people who were telling him these names, they know about them. A lot of these names come from Genesis chapter 5 and then Genesis chapter 10, but not all of them. There's just a ton to do here. And what you can do, if you really want to spend a lot of time doing something, is you can take each name and look up the etymology of that name, figure out where it came from and what it means, and then you can start making your own stories. But names do mean something sometimes, not always. Jacob, the deceiver, his name meant something. But anyway, so we're not the Jacob yet. So in verse 43, one of the sons of Abraham, whose name Ishmael, he becomes the direct father of the Arabs, Ishmael. The 12 tribes of Arabs, and all somewhere he's going to list all 12 sons of Ishmael, who become the Arab people. Okay, so here we go, and I think I'm through with chapter 1. Okay. Ham goes south. Shem stays around Mesopotamia and spreads out all the way eventually to Canaan. He is not the father of the Canaanites. His brother Japheth is the one that went south. That's who the Canaanites come from. And I think the Philistines come from him. But so the people who will eventually inhabit that land of Canaan, named so because it's full of Canaanites, that will be Israel. And they're going to come from this fella named Abraham. So we know all that, and here again, Ezra is, what's he doing? I'm reminding you of your history, because what is the number one thing on the people's mind now? Now, we're close to, 100 years after the people were allowed to come back into the land. 100 years have gone by. Man, that's a long time, but the people are still in a state of confusion. They're a wreck. But the number one thing is, we have no king. We don't have a king. That's why after we get to chapter 10, the whole rest of of First Chronicles is about one guy, and that's David. The whole thing. So all right. Does anybody have a comment or a question so far? Oh, look, you're not the only one, but you have to. Every once in a while, you're going to get lucky, and you're going to say, "Oh, hey, I've heard of that one. I've heard of that one." But we come to chapter 2. Time goes on, and now we've got the genealogy of one of Abraham, or of Abraham's, the son of promise, not the son of promise, the grandson of the son of promise, Jacob. The son of promise is Isaac. His father is Abraham. So, and he is called in chapter 2 and verse 1, Jacob is called Israel. Now that's something that God does in the prophets every once in a while. To say, you're not two divided kingdoms. He calls his people Israel because way back in Genesis, one fine day as Jacob, who is called Israel, how come he's called Israel? Well, the simple answer is because of what Israel means. It means to strive with God. And all right, well, you got to go back. One night, Jacob was camped out in a place called Penuel, and he had escaped from his father-in-law after 21 years of hard labor for a girl named Rachel. He had, you know the story. So after, now he's got 2 wives, and he finally broke away from his evil uncle Laban, and so he sent his family off ahead, and he's camped by himself, and this angel shows up, and they get in a wrestling match. Man, to be a fly on the wall. You know what I mean? An ant on a rock. Something to be there and watch this go on, because eventually this angel is Yahweh himself. And during this wrestling match, old Jacob grabs a hold of him, and the angel says, "You need to let go." "No, not till you bless me." God, and Yahweh does bless him, but he does something else. He changes his name from trickster to strives with God. I mean, well, not much of a name change, I wouldn't say, but he changes his name from Jacob to Israel. Now your name is Israel, and so that's a personal name for a personal guy. But here in chapter 2 and verse 1, this is the name that's first of all used for Jacob. Later on, he will use Israel as for the whole 12 tribes. But so here we are. Okay. So the 12 tribes are listed in verses 1 and 2. The 12 sons of Jacob. And then we come to one of the sons in verse 3, and his name is Judah. The sons of Judah were Onan, and Shelah. Who remembers this story? Okay, this is worth looking at because we're looking at history, we're looking at hope. And if you look at the history of Judah, you're going to say, how could there be any hope there? Genesis, I think it's 37. We've got an interlude from the time that the boys sold their brother Joseph to the Midianite traders. And from the time we pick up the story of Joseph, there's this story in chapter 38 of Genesis of Judah, the son, the man Judah. And I think I'm just going to take time to read this because, for one, it is a fascinating story. And I've said this several times. If you're going to read, if God's going to write a history of himself and his people, why would you write it this way? You know what I'm talking about? Oh, let me read. You're going to find out. And it came about that time, Genesis 38, that Judah departed from his brothers. Okay, that time, okay, they just did their dirty deed with their spoiled brat brother, Joseph. And so it came about at that time that Judah departed from his brothers and visited a certain Adullamite, whose name was Hira, some guy from Adullam. I forget where that even is, but anyway. So, okay, while he's in Adullam, verse 2, Judah saw there was a daughter of a certain Canaanite. Okay, we don't have the kind of, well, they probably are. But this is 450 years before Joshua fights Canaanites. Let's see, 400, it's about like that. Something like that. Jacob and his wife Leah are living in the land. I think that maybe, unless I mess up, I don't know if Benjamin, he's the last son, but when he's born, he gives Rachel so much trouble that she dies, and she's buried, and I think she is buried in Abraham's tomb with Abraham and Sarah. I might be making stuff up there. Okay, anyway, so in verse 2, okay, Judah saw. Whenever you see those words in the scriptural, take notice. Judah's eyeballs popped out. When he saw a certain Canaanite whose name was Shua, and he took her and went into her. Doesn't say anything about him marrying her or anything. He just takes this Canaanite girl and he went in. You know what that means? Okay. I wonder what kind of a ceremony you have with a Canaanite. Anyway. So he, all right, he took her and went into her. Okay, what does went into her mean? It means verse 3, she conceived. So now we know what that means. So she conceived and bore a son and named him Now we just read back at First Chronicles. Ezra's named these three sons of one of the sons of Jacob, Judah. Okay, here's the firstborn, Then she conceived again and bore a son and named him Onan. Verse 5. She bore still another son and named him Shelah. and it was at Kezib that she bore him. Okay, so, all right. So, time goes by. Now, firstborn, he's ready to be married. He's probably 18, 20 years old, and it's time for a 14-year-old wife. That's the way you do stuff. And so, now, verse 6, now Judah took a wife for his firstborn. This is a very common protocol for marriage. Dad goes and gets a wife. He meets with the girl's dad, and they figure out a price to pay, for this bride, and it all looks to Jesus. They come to terms, and they figure out, he can marry her. Now, it doesn't say anything about the betrothal period here, but for a period of a year, the prospective husband, he goes away for a year. Then he tells his wife, I'm going to leave for a while, but I'll be back. I'll be back. There goes Jesus in the Jewish wedding process. And after a year, he comes back and he says, now you can come and be with me where I am. Oh man, I'm telling you. It's easy to get sidetracked on stuff like that. But what a picture just a simple wedding ceremony makes of the relationship between Jesus and the church. Anyway, so verse 6, Judah took a wife for his firstborn, and her name was Tamar. Verse 7, but Judah's firstborn, was evil in the sight of the Lord, so the Lord took his life. I have no clue what he did. Not at all. But whatever he did, it was bad enough that God killed him. Now, what's Tamar? Besides out in the cold, she's a widow. What's it like to be a widow in the ancient Near East? This is okay, but we got to remember there is the law of the kinsman redeemer, which is not here yet, not till Moses in the law, but it's already a part of this society. It's the next relative's duty to produce an heir for his dead brother. This is called a levirate marriage. And the marriage of the kinsman redeemer is what he's called. That's what the story of Ruth is about. So, verse 7, but God killed him. Verse 8, then Judah said to Onan, here's son number 2. Go into your brother's wife and perform your duty. There's no explanation here, but every reader knows what that duty is. This is how you continue the name of the dead son by producing an heir. But his wife has no husband, but she does. Even if this guy's married, even if he's already got 3 wives, he's got to take another one. So, then Judah, dad, says to Onan, son number 2, go into your brother's wife and perform your duty as a brother-in-law to her, and raise up an offspring for your brother to continue his name. All right, so verse 9. Onan knew that the offspring would not be his. This is already as wicked a thought as you could have. This is called spitting on your brother's grave here. Onan knew that the offspring would not be his. So when he went into his brother's wife, he wasted his seed on the ground in order not to give her offspring to his brother. And I'm not going to explain that. Verse 10. But what he did was displeasing in the sight of the Lord, so God, took his life also. Listen, you're not just learning about sinful man here. You're reading about a holy God. And if you don't know who a holy God is, he is not to be trifled with. He is not to be trifled with, even though he is full, as John says of God the Son in John chapter 1, verse 14, even though he is full of grace and mercy. Is that how he puts it in verse 14? He's full. He's full of that, but he is full of holiness too. And he is full of judgment. He's not to be messed with. And boy, if you learn one thing here, learn that God, who never changes, by the way, this is not the Old Testament God, guys. This is not the God who used to be. This is the one who sits at the right hand of the Father, Jesus Christ. That's who this is. But okay, he's got 3 sons. All right, so far we've got 2 down. 2 down and 1 leaning, by the way, and he's a young guy. Then Judah, in verse 11, said to his daughter-in-law Tamar, remain a widow in your father's house. In other words, go back to Canaan, wherever you came from. Go away. You're the reason 2 of my sons are dead. Black widow, you. And then Judah said to Tamar, remain a widow, verse 11, in your father's house until my son Shelah grows up. So he's not old enough yet, but do you think Judah has any intention of letting son number 3 become the 3rd victim of Tamar, the black widow? Not a chance. But, okay, verse 11 down there where it says remain a widow in your father's house until my son Shelah grows up, for he thought, I'm afraid that he too may die like his brothers. Well, so I jumped ahead of the story there. He just told on himself. So Tamar went and lived in her father's house. Now remember here, guys, this is the history of Judah, the tribe of Judah, the tribe of David, and the tribe of who else? Jesus himself. This is, man, this is his human roots here. All right, verse 12. After considerable time, Shua's daughter, the wife of Judah, okay, this is the Canaanite girl that Judah married back up in verse 2 or 1. Okay, she died. And when the time of mourning was ended, Judah went up to his sheep shearers at Timnah, and he and his friend Hira, the Adulamite. Here's another, this Adulam. It's just a town down there in southern Judah. So, okay, verse 13. So it was told Tamar, okay, here is the jilted daughter-in-law. It was told Tamar, behold, your father-in-law is going up to Timnah to shear his sheep. So, verse 14, she removed her widow's garment and covered herself with a veil and wrapped herself and sat in the gateway of Enaim, which is on the road to Timnah. And she had not been, let's see, and she had not been given to him as a wife. That would be son number 3. Anyway, okay. Let me try the. Verse 14. She removed her widow's garment, covered herself with a veil, and wrapped herself, and sat at the gateway of Enaim, which is on the road to Timnah. For she saw that Shelah had grown up. Okay, son number 3 has grown up, and what hasn't happened? She still doesn't have a husband. And she had not been given to him as a wife. Okay, I just didn't read one line there. Verse 15. When Judah saw her, okay, now here comes a father-in-law. When Judah saw her, he thought she was a harlot, for she covered her face. Verse 16. So he turned aside to her by the road and said, Here now, let me come in to you. For he did not know that she was his daughter-in-law. Okay? And she said, What will you give me? Since you think I'm a prostitute, what will you give me that you may come in to me? Oh boy, this is the... Yeah, this is... Verse 17, he said, Therefore, I will send you a young goat from the flock. What a guy. And she said, Moreover, will you give me a pledge until you send it? Believe me, she is not to be trifled with, this girl. Oh, you bet. Yes, verse 18, he said, What pledge shall I give you? And she said, Your seal and your cord and your staff that is in your hand. Okay, your seal, maybe he has a ring with the family seal on it. I don't know. Your cord and your shepherd's staff. Let me have that as surety. And then, So he gave them to her and went into her, and she conceived by him. Well, that was the plan all along. Then she arose and departed and removed her veil and put on her widow's garments. Man, she is somebody, boy, whose history is this? Okay, verse 20, when Judah sent the young goat by his friend, the Adulamite, to receive the pledge from the woman's hand, see, that was the deal. We'll trade. I'm going to send you a goat. She said, Oh, how do I know you're going to send me a goat? Give me your ring and Okay, now the goat comes. Not by him, by the way. By a second party. I mean, this Judah, this guy, he is as low a character as you can imagine. Verse 24, to receive the pledge from her. He did not find her, the friend. Verse 21, he asked the men of her place, saying, Where is the temple prostitute? Okay, that's a whole nother story. This is a Canaanite temple where part of their worship is prostitutes who are male and female. They are priests and priestesses. that's how you offer up worship to Baal. Okay, that's another sordid story. Okay, where is the verse 21? Where is the temple prostitute who was? Anyway, that's who Judah thinks she is. Who was by the road at Anaim, but they said there has been no temple prostitute here. So verse 22, he returned to Judah and said, I did not find her. And furthermore, the men of the place said, there has been no temple prostitute here. Then Judah said, verse 23, let her keep them. Otherwise, we will become a laughing stock. We. You got a mouse in your pocket? His friend should have said. Otherwise, we will become a laughing stock. This is Judah. Man, I'm telling you. After all, I sent this young goat, but you did not find her. Okay, the deal's done. Can't. All right. Now it was about 3 months later that Judah was informed, your daughter-in-law has played the harlot, and behold, she is also with child by harlotry. Somebody has noticed the baby bump, and now Tamar, she's committed fornications, adultery. Okay, so child of harlotry. Then the last line before verse 25, then Judah said, bring her out and let her be burned. Boy, this is a pious, right on guy, this Judah, isn't he? It was, let's see, I forgot where I was at. Well, 25. Okay. Let her be burned. Verse 25. It was while she was being brought out that she sent to her father-in-law saying, I am with child by the man to whom these things belong. What could she be talking about? He doesn't know. Bring him on. All right. I'll find the guy to who they belong. And how does this story sound to you now? It sounds to me like a descendant of Judah, the guy that Ezra is about to bring to the forefront, David. Nathan's telling him about a guy who stole a sheep. And David said, that man shall die. Bring him here. Even though a lot of years passed, the apple doesn't far fall from the tree. And the apple called sin doesn't fall far from the tree. And it falls all over the place on everybody. So, Judah recognized, verse 26. Okay, please, all right. I'm with child. Please examine and see at the end of verse 25 whose signet ring, cords, and staff these are. And Judah recognized them. Talk about wanting to be a fly on the wall, just to see the expression on his face, if nothing else. Judah, verse 26, recognized them and said, she is more righteous than I. Okay, she's not very righteous, but he's right. She's more righteous than he is. Inasmuch as I did not give her to my son Shelah, and he did not have relations with her again. I guess not. Okay. So she's going to have two sons. 2 sons. In verse 29, at the very end of verse 29, one's name is Perez. Okay, that's the name to look out for, because that is the direct ancestor of David. If you go to Ruth chapter 4 to the end and read the ancestry of David through Ruth, you'll see his name in there, related to Boaz, a son of David, by the way. Okay. I did that just to kind of give a flavor of this genealogy, so I can know what the people are thinking when they read these names. See, they know all this better than I do, and they're thinking about history. We have a history with God who has never left us. Even though he sent us to Babylon, here we are, we're back in the land. This is what Ezra is trying to get through to him through these genealogies. And you go through the next bunch, the sons of Jacob, and there's just there's not enough going on there for me to. It talks mostly about where the sons live in their allotments, the cities, and things like that. The 12 sons, and in chapter 8, you begin. Okay, here's the smallest tribe, Benjamin. Okay, who comes out of Benjamin? King Saul, that's who. Why talk about that guy? Well, because he's the first king, that's why. And because he was intimately, good or bad, involved with David. So that's what we'll talk about next week. And I'm not going to go through Saul's genealogy. In chapter 9, after the exile, present day Jerusalem, the genealogy post-exile of the people living in Jerusalem. And I said, okay, well, people of Judah live in Jerusalem, right? Well, in verse 3, some of the sons of Judah, this is the inhabitants of Jerusalem. Some of the sons of Judah, of the sons of Benjamin, and of the sons of Ephraim and Manasseh lived in Jerusalem. Who lives in Jerusalem? Well, this doesn't mean the whole tribe of Ephraim. There's people from different tribes living in Jerusalem. That's another thing. That's a very key thing that Ezra wants to bring out here. You guys are one people. I want you to notice that all Israel means all 12 sons are one people. And so in chapter 9, that's what you get. And Saul's ancestry is repeated again, another part of it, in chapter 9, verses 35 to the end. And we'll pick it up next week in chapter 10. Here's a story of Saul. And it just happens to be the last story of Saul. And then we go right to David. All right, comments or questions? Okay.